The first thing Mara felt was the cold, sharp, biting, and unforgiving as the river's current dragged her under. She had been crossing the Rio del Norte at dawn, mist curling over the water like ghostly fingers, when a sudden flash flood erupted from upstream. One moment the river had been shallow, manageable. The next, it was a roiling wall of water and debris. Her horse, startled by the roar, bolted, leaving her to cling desperately to a jagged rock. The icy water churned around her legs, tugging at her skirts and satchel. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but Mara fought to control her breathing, her pulse hammering like a drum in her ears. "Mara, hold on." A voice shouted from somewhere upstream. She squinted through the spray, barely making out a figure, a man, massive and unyielding, wading through the torrent as if it were a gentle stream. His long black hair clung to his back, wet and glistening, and tribal jewelry glittered at his wrists and neck. He moved with deliberate, unhurried steps, each one somehow calculated against the violent push of the river. "Grab my hand," he yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. Mara lunged instinctively. His grip was like iron, his calloused fingers closing around hers with impossible strength. He pulled her toward a large boulder, hoisting her up as water rushed past, threatening to sweep them both away. Mara collapsed against the rock, shivering violently, and realized with horror that her dress had been torn to shreds by the violent current. I have nothing," she stammered, her voice lost in the roar of the river. "Take my shirt," he said abruptly, a half-smile touching his lips. He tore off the loose garment he wore over his chest and shoved it toward her. "You're not dying of modesty today." The shirt was enormous, sleeves dragging past her hands, but she wrapped it around herself. It was warm, the scent of cedar smoke clinging faintly to it, a small comfort in the chaos. Mara looked up at her rescuer, a mix of awe and embarrassment in her eyes. "I'm Mara," she said, attempting to steady her voice despite her shaking. "Ronan," he replied simply, scanning the river with hawk-like focus. "If we want to survive this canyon, we need to move, fast." Mara followed him as he navigated the treacherous riverbank, her bare feet slipping over wet stones. She had traveled alone through the West many times, mapping survey lines and assessing potential railroad routes. She was used to danger, yes, but nothing like this. The river had not only tested her courage but stripped her of all illusion of safety. The flood had left a trail of destruction. Dead branches and debris littered the banks, and in the swirling mud, Mara's eye caught a glint metallic, deliberate. She pointed to it. "Ronan, what's that?" He waded back into the shallows and pulled out a small, intricately carved box, encrusted with dirt and stones. Its surface was etched with symbols she didn't recognize, patterns that seemed almost alive, curling and twisting like the river itself. "I don't know," he admitted, wiping it clean with the edge of his shirt. "But it's not safe here. And it's not yours." Mara's curiosity flared, even as the cold gnawed at her bones. The box felt heavy in her hands, both literally and metaphorically, as if it carried the weight of centuries. She knew immediately that it was significant, that this moment was not mere coincidence. "We should find shelter," Ronan said, scanning the horizon. "The flood may have passed, but danger doesn't end just because the water stops." They climbed higher along the bank, the rocks slick under their feet, the river's roar a constant reminder of the power they were facing. Mara's body ached from the exertion, but she pushed forward. Guided by the steady presence of Ronan, she noted the strange jewelry he wore: feathers, beads, and small carved stones. Artifacts that hinted at a deep connection to the land and its ancient people. By mid-morning, they reached a small alcove in the canyon, a natural shelter formed by overhanging rock. Mara collapsed against the stone, exhausted, water dripping from her hair and clothes. Ronan knelt nearby, starting a small fire with skillful movements. Sparks leapt into the air, catching in the mist as he coaxed flames to life. "You need to eat," he said, tossing her a piece of hard bread and a small chunk of smoked meat he had salvaged from his pack. "You won't survive if you waste energy shivering." Mara ate slowly, her teeth chattering. She watched him, noting the calm confidence in his movements, the way he read the land as easily as most people read a map. There was something almost uncanny about him, a man completely at home in the wilderness. "You? You seem familiar with this land," she said cautiously. "I grew up here," he admitted. "Most people don't. I know the rivers, the cliffs, the trails bandits use." "You don't get that without a lifetime of learning." Mara nodded, absorbing the weight of his words. Then a whisper of movement in the shadows made her freeze. Soft, purposeful footsteps. Not a man too light, too deliberate. She glanced at Ronan. His expression didn't change, but his body TENCD figures emerged from the trees, moving with the precision of predators. Women. Mara's breath caught. They were Apache tall, lean, faces painted, eyes sharp with suspicion. The leader, a woman with dark eyes and painted cheekbones, stepped forward. "Why is she here?" The leader demanded, her voice both commanding and wary. Ronan stepped in front of Mara, placing himself between her and the women. "She's hurt." "She didn't mean to intrude," he said, his tone calm but firm. The leader's gaze flicked to Mara, then back to Ronan, assessing. Mara could feel the tension in the air like a physical weight, heavy and charged. She realized these women were not just warriors, they were protectors of something sacred. Mara spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. I found a box in the river. I don't know what it is, but I think it belongs to you." The leader's eyes narrowed, and she studied the box as Ronan handed it over. Mud fell from its carvings, revealing delicate vials, folded papers, and small stones that glimmered in the firelight. Mara felt a chill not from the cold, but from the gravity of her discovery. These were relics, perhaps lost or hidden to protect them from those who would exploit them. The leader's expression softened slightly. She looked at Ronan, then back at Mara, and finally nodded. "Bring it inside. You may have saved us from dishonor, but trust is not given lightly here." As Mara stepped forward to hand over the box, she felt a mix of awe and fear. The artifacts inside were more than objects. They were pieces of a culture, a history, a story that spanned generations. She understood, in a sudden, vivid way, that she had stumbled into something far bigger than herself. Once the box was safely inside the camp, Mara turned to Ronan. Who are you?" She whispered. "I'm someone who has answers," he said, his voice low, almost secretive. "But not all of them. The box is just the beginning." The night settled over the canyon, and Mara shivered despite the fire. She realized her adventure had only begun. The flood, the river, the box, and these fierce women were not accidents, they were pieces of a story. A mystery of the land that had chosen her as much as she had chosen to explore it. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen by either Mara or Ronan, the river whispered, carrying with it secrets of danger, betrayal, and a past that would not remain buried. The desert night stretched out like a blanket of velvet, dotted with pinpricks of stars. Mara shivered, partly from the lingering chill of the river and partly from the sense of being utterly exposed. The canyon's shadows loomed around them, jagged and unyielding, but Ronan had fashioned a makeshift shelter from driftwood and tarps left by the flood. The fire flickered, sending sparks spiraling into the night, painting the rocks around them in ghostly orange. "You need to eat," Ronan said, breaking the silence. He handed her a slab of dried meat and a piece of hard bread. Mara nibbled carefully, teeth chattering. Her mind, though, was elsewhere on the box, the flood, and the women they had met. There was something about Tansa, the leader of the Apache women, that lingered in her mind, a mix of authority, wisdom, and caution. "You're quiet," Ronan observed, his dark eyes catching the firelight. "Thinking about them?" Mara nodded, biting her lip. I can't stop thinking about the box. About what's inside and why it was there. Why the river? Why everything happened so suddenly?" Ronan leaned back against a rock, gazing at the stars. "Some things in this land are older than us. Some currents, some rivers, some stones. They have their own purpose. Maybe the flood wasn't an accident. Maybe it brought you here for a reason." Mara swallowed. There was truth in that, and fear. She had always believed in her own ability to navigate danger. But tonight, she realized there were forces she couldn't control. Forces older than settlers, older than railroads, older than even the canyons themselves. From the darkness came a whisper, a soft sound that made Mara's spine tighten. She froze. Ronan tensed as well, his gaze sweeping the perimeter. "You hear that?" Mara whispered. "Apache women," Ronan said, his voice low. "They're scouting, watching. Not all will approach, not all will trust." Mara's heart raced. She had survived floods, stampedes, and desert storms, but this was different. These women were not just observers. They were protectors, guardians, and she had just walked into their world. The footsteps drew closer, and then a figure stepped into the firelight. Tansa, her face painted with traditional markings, her posture regal and commanding, emerged from the shadows. "You brought the box," Tansa said, her tone carrying both caution and authority. "Why did you take it from the river?" Mara stepped forward, holding her hands out to show she meant no harm. "I didn't take it to keep. I found it, and I thought it belonged to you. I wanted to return it safely." Tansa's dark eyes narrowed. She studied Mara for a long moment, as if weighing her words against her spirit. Finally, she nodded. "Perhaps you are not like the others who would steal from the river, from the land, from us. You acted without greed. That is unusual." Ronan moved closer, keeping a watchful eye on the surrounding darkness. "We don't mean any harm. We just want to survive and help if we can." Tansa's gaze softened slightly. "Then you may accompany us. But remember, this trust is earned, not given. And in our land, every choice has consequence." Mara nodded solemnly, realizing that her journey had grown more complicated. The box was no longer just an artifact, it was a key, a responsibility, and perhaps even a test. By dawn, Mara and Ronan had joined the Apache women on the trail, moving through narrow desert passes and across dry riverbeds. The terrain was unforgiving, sand that burned underfoot, jagged rocks that tore at their boots, and wind that carried grit into every exposed surface. Yet amidst the harshness, Mara marveled at the beauty, the way the first rays of sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and amber. The whisper of desert plants resilient against the wind. Tansa walked ahead with fluid precision, her movements a study in balance and grace. She paused occasionally to inspect symbols etched into stones, subtle markings that Mara recognized from the carvings on the box. They were a map, perhaps, or a warning. Each mark seemed deliberate, a language of the land itself. "What are these?" Mara asked quietly, pointing to a cluster of markings on a large boulder. "They are guides," Tansa said softly, without turning. "Warnings for those who know how to read them. This land speaks to those who listen." Mara studied the symbols carefully. Her years as a surveyor had trained her to notice details others missed. She felt a shiver of excitement. Not only had she survived the flood, but now she was unraveling a puzzle tied to history, culture, and mystery. As they continued along the trail, Mara sensed eyes watching them from a distance. Shadows moved between the rocks, staying just out of sight. Bandits? Treasure hunters? She didn't know, but she knew instinctively that danger was near. Suddenly, a shrill cry pierced the air, a hawk, or something more human. Mara's heart leapt. The group froze. Tansa's hand went to the small dagger at her hip. Ronan's hand brushed the hilt of his revolver. Mara realized they had been lured here deliberately. From the crest of a nearby ridge, a group of men emerged, armed and aggressive. Their clothes were dusty, their eyes hardened by greed and experience. Mara recognized the insignia on their hats, infamous treasure hunters who preyed on both settlers and native tribes. Notorious for taking anything of value from the land. "Hand over the box," the leader barked. Spitting tobacco. Ronan's stance was calm but tense, a coiled spring ready to strike. "You don't know what you're dealing with," he warned. The leader laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Try us?" Mara's mind raced. The terrain favored the bandits. They had higher ground, loose rocks to hurl, and the cover of dunes. She knew that a direct confrontation would be dangerous. But she also realized that panicking would be worse. "Ronan," she whispered, "the canyon to the east, it's narrow. If they follow us, they'll be trapped. We can use the terrain against them." Ronan's eyes flickered, appreciation and a hint of pride showing. "You're right, but we'll need to move fast." The group began their maneuver, weaving through rocks and sand, using the narrow canyon as a natural choke point. Mara's pulse pounded as she guided Ronan and the Apache women, her mind calculating every step, every potential hazard. The bandits followed, unaware of the trap being laid. Mara spotted loose boulders above, ready to be dislodged. With a subtle nod to Ronan, he pushed one carefully down. It tumbled, crashing into the path, sending a cloud of dust and debris into the air. The lead bandit stumbled, shouting in surprise, while others skidded to avoid the rocks. Using the confusion, Mara and Ronan dashed ahead, leading the bandits deeper into the canyon. Mara's breath burned her lungs, but she focused on the path, the box, and the women following silently behind. Each step was deliberate, calculated, a dance with life and death. Finally, they reached the narrowest point of the canyon. The walls rose on either side, jagged and unscalable. Ronan and the Apache women blocked the only exit, their presence like a living barricade. Mara felt a surge of relief. The bandits had nowhere to run. The confrontation was brief. Outnumbered and trapped, the treasure hunters fled, some disappearing into the desert, others captured by the Apache women with precise, controlled movements. Mara realized then that she had been part of something larger than herself. She had survived not only the river and the flood, but an orchestrated ambush. And she had contributed, through quick thinking and courage, to the group's success. As the dust settled and the desert sun began its slow climb toward noon, Mara opened the box again. Inside, the vials and stones glimmered, the folded papers revealing strange symbols. She knew now that this was no ordinary artifact. It was a key to history, a link to a people whose past had been hidden from the world. Tansa approached Mara, her expression unreadable but her presence commanding. "You have proven yourself," she said. "Not all who find the river are meant to carry the river's secrets. You have shown respect, courage, and wisdom. That is rare." Mara felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had survived against the odds, yes, but she knew her journey had only begun. The flood, the river, the desert, the bandits, and now the Apache women, they were all part of a larger story, a story she was now entwined with, whether she wanted it or not. Ronan placed a steady hand on her shoulder, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You're stronger than you realize, Mara, and whatever comes next, we face it together." Mara nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude and trust. She was no longer alone. The desert, the canyon, and the river had tested her, but they had also revealed her strength. and the bond forming between her and Ronan. The group continued along the trail, the desert sun high and merciless. Mara's thoughts turned to the future, the secrets of the box, the history it represented, and the challenges yet to come. The land was harsh, unforgiving, and beautiful, and she was ready to face it, one step at a time. And as the canyon stretched before them, Mara understood something vital. She was no longer just a traveler in the West. She was a guardian, a seeker and a survivor, and her story was only beginning. The desert sun rose like a cruel overseer, burning the land with its unrelenting heat. Mara shaded her eyes with one hand while gripping the reins of her horse with the other. Every muscle in her body ached from the previous day's ordeal, the river, the flood, and the ambush in the canyon, but she refused to show weakness. Not now. Not when the stakes were so high. Ronan rode beside her, tall and steady, long black hair plastered to his back, his muscular frame shining with sweat beneath the bright sun. His tribal jewelry caught the light, glinting with the movements of his body. He rode with confidence, his dark eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Mara felt a mixture of admiration and unease. His skill made him almost untouchable in the wilderness. Yet she sensed secrets in him, layers she had yet to uncover. Tansa led the small group of Apache women ahead, their movements silent and precise. They were returning the box to a hidden valley, a place Mara had yet to see but felt the pull of even in her imagination. She had begun to understand that the box was more than a container of artifacts. It was a key to something much larger, something tied to the tribe's history and the land itself. As the trail wound through jagged rocks and dry riverbeds, Mara noticed strange symbols etched into the stone along the path similar to the carvings on the box. She pointed one out to Tansa. "These markings," Mara said cautiously, "they look like the ones on the box. Are they directions?" Tansa's eyes, sharp and dark, studied the symbols. "Guides," she said. "Warnings as well. The land speaks, but only to those who listen." Mara nodded slowly. The realization settled in her chest like a weight. This journey was no longer just about survival or returning a box. It was about understanding, about respecting a heritage she had only begun to glimpse. Their progress was interrupted abruptly by a sharp movement on a nearby dune. Mara's heart jumped. Shadows shifted against the pale sand. She squinted, and her stomach dropped. Bandits. The same group from the canyon, bloodied and furious, had tracked them through the desert. "They followed us," Mara whispered, gripping her horse's reins tighter. Ronan's eyes narrowed. "Stay calm. Don't panic. They'll make mistakes." The bandits emerged fully into view, dusty and armed, their eyes wild with greed. Mara counted at least 8 men, each carrying rifles and pistols. The leader, recognizable by his scarred cheek and harsh voice, spat into the sand. "Hand over the box," he yelled. Ronan's hand hovered over his revolver, but he said nothing. Mara, sensing the urgency, scanned the terrain. The desert was a trap of its own making, narrow passes, dunes, and jagged cliffs. If used correctly, it could become an advantage rather than a danger. "They'll follow us into the pass east of here," Mara said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "It's narrow. They won't be able to maneuver. We can trap them." Ronan glanced at her, a flash of admiration in his dark eyes. "You're right. Lead the way." The group moved swiftly, weaving through the dunes and rocky terrain. The bandits followed, unaware of Mara's plan. She noticed loose stones and boulders above the trail. With a subtle nod to Ronan, he pushed one over and it tumbled down, narrowly missing a bandit and sending a cloud of dust into the air. The leader cursed, momentarily thrown off, giving the group a precious advantage. Mara's pulse pounded as they reached the narrowest part of the canyon. The walls rose on either side, jagged and nearly vertical. Ronan positioned himself and the Apache women at the exit. The bandits, trapped in the narrow passage, had no room to fight effectively. Some froze in shock. Others tried to flee, but the women's skill was precise and controlled. Mara realized then how much she had changed in just a short span of days. She had been terrified in the river, exposed and vulnerable. Now she was calculating strategy, observing terrain, and understanding the subtle nuances of the land skill she had never imagined she could possess. The confrontation lasted mere minutes. Some bandits fled into the desert, cursing. Others were captured with ropes and careful precision. Mara stood beside Ronan, feeling the tension finally drained from her body. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe. Though the heat of the sun pressed down relentlessly, Ronan finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "You did well, Mara. You stayed focused. You saved us from more than just the bandits." Mara flushed, not out of pride, but from the recognition of her own growth. "I had help," she said, glancing at the Apache women. "And guidance. I couldn't have done it alone." Tansa approached, her movements fluid, eyes assessing. She placed a hand on Mara's shoulder, firm but not heavy. "You have proven yourself. Not all who find the river are meant to carry the river's secrets. You have shown respect, courage, and wisdom. That is rare." Mara felt a strange warmth at Tansa's words. In the desert, trust was earned slowly through action and character. And she realized that she had taken her first true steps into a world she could have never imagined, a world of history, heritage, and danger intertwined. The group continued along the trail, moving through heat and wind, their path dictated by ancient markings and instinct. Mara felt the weight of the box at her side, a small but constant reminder that the journey was far from over. Inside were vials, folded papers, and glimmering stones. They were relics of a past long hidden, and she now carried their fate with her dot. As the sun climbed higher, Mara noticed a shift in the air. The desert, so harsh and dry, held pockets of life she hadn't seen before. Small cacti bloomed unexpectedly, and birds wheeled overhead. Mara realized that even in the most unforgiving land, beauty persisted. And perhaps, she thought, there was hope for survival and understanding, even in the harshest conditions. The group paused near a narrow wash, a natural corridor between two cliffs. Tansa knelt to inspect the rocks, her fingers tracing symbols. Mara leaned closer. The carvings seemed to tell a story of floods, of rivers, of hidden treasures, and the people who protected them. She felt a deep connection to the land, as if it had chosen her, not just to survive, but to witness, to learn, to honor what had been lost. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Mara's stomach dropped. Figures appeared on a ridge above a scouting party of more bandits, smaller, faster, likely attempting to flank them. Mara felt a pang of fear, but it was tempered by determination. She knew what she had learned from the previous day. The land itself could be an ally. "Ronan," she whispered urgently, "we need to split them up. Use the rocks on the left and the narrow trail on the right. Force them into confusion." Ronan nodded. "Lead the way." Using her knowledge of terrain, Mara guided the group. Loose rocks tumbled from above as the bandits approached, startling them and breaking their formation. The Apache women moved like shadows, taking advantage of the disarray to capture a few more. Mara, for the first time, felt exhilaration instead of fear. She was part of the solution, part of the defense, not just a passive observer. As the last bandit fled into the desert, Mara leaned against a rock, sweat mingling with the dust on her skin. She realized how far she had come from a woman nearly swept away by a flood, to someone capable of facing armed men in the unforgiving desert. She looked at Ronan, his chest heaving slightly, eyes calm and steady. "You've changed," he said softly, almost as if reading her thoughts. "I've had to," Mara replied. "I didn't realize I could do any of this until it happened." Tansa approached, placing her hand lightly on Mara's shoulder. "You have learned quickly. The river brought you to us, and the desert has tested you. You are no longer just a traveler. You are a witness, a protector, and perhaps a friend." Mara felt the words settle in her chest, heavy but affirming. The journey was far from over. The desert still held dangers. The artifact box still held mysteries, but she felt a growing strength within herself. She had survived floods, ambush, and desert heat. Now she understood that the land, with all its peril and beauty, was teaching her its lessons. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the dunes, Mara and Ronan followed Tansa deeper into the desert. The box rested safely against Ronan's saddle, a reminder of the past and a guide to the future. Mara knew that this journey was not just about survival, but about discovery, respect, and the ties that bound people to their land and history. And as the wind carried the scent of distant sagebrush and the faint sound of flowing water, Mara felt a renewed determination. The desert had tested her body and spirit, but it had also revealed her courage. She was no longer just a woman lost in the wilderness. She was part of a story, part of history, and the journey was only beginning. The sun hovered low over the desert, bleeding gold and crimson across the canyon walls. Mara's throat was dry, her boots heavy with dust, but the sight of the hidden valley ahead stole her breath. Nestled between cliffs and shadowed by jagged peaks, it looked untouched by time, as if the desert itself had shielded it from human greed and eyes. She sensed immediately that the valley held the answers they had been seeking, and perhaps more than they could imagine. Tansa led the way, moving with a rhythm that mirrored the land. Her eyes scanned every ridge and boulder as if reading a story only she could understand. The Apache women followed in silence, their presence both protective and watchful. Mara rode beside Ronan, feeling the weight of the past days and the anticipation of what lay ahead. "Are we close?" Mara asked quietly. Tansa glanced back at her, her eyes dark and unreadable. "Closer than you think. But the valley does not reveal its secrets easily. Respect it, and it will accept you. Rush it, and it will reject you." Ronan's hand brushed Mara's, brief but grounding. She felt a surge of gratitude for his steadfast presence, his quiet confidence that had guided them through floods, ambushers, and the relentless desert heat. As they descended into the valley, Mara's eyes widened. It was lush, almost impossibly so, with a river cutting through its heart, sparkling in the late afternoon sun. Wildflowers dotted the banks, and tall grasses swayed in the breeze. The contrast between the harsh desert and this hidden oasis was staggering. Mara could almost believe they had stepped into another world. Tansa halted near the river, gesturing for Mara and Ronan to dismount. "This is where the river speaks, where the box belongs. You must understand, Mara, that what you carry is sacred. It is not treasure in the sense of gold or silver. It holds knowledge, memory, and the connection between our people and the land." Mara approached the box cautiously, reverently. She had carried it through floods and desert storms, had defended it against greedy bandits, and now she felt the full weight of its significance. Opening the lid carefully, she revealed the contents: vials filled with pigments, folded papers covered in symbols, and carved stones that shimmered in the sunlight. "These markings," Mara said, tracing the symbols with a trembling finger, "they're like a language." "They are," Tansa confirmed. "A record of our history, our treaties, our sacred knowledge. Some of these were lost to time, others hidden to protect them from those who would use them for destruction. The river returned them to you because you have proven your heart." Mara swallowed hard, feeling the enormity of Tansa's words. She had thought she was merely surviving. She hadn't realized she was carrying something far greater, a responsibility that transcended life or death. Suddenly, the wind shifted. Mara instinctively stepped back, her eyes scanning the edges of the valley. Bandits? Another threat? But there was nothing, just the rustling grass and the sparkling river. She exhaled slowly. The valley seemed alive, aware, protective. Ronan stepped forward beside her. "It's safe," he murmured. His hand brushed against hers, steadying her. "We're exactly where we're meant to be." Tansa moved to the river, dipping her fingers into the water and then onto the carvings inside the box. The pigment seemed to react, glowing faintly in the sunlight. Mara's eyes widened. It was as if the valley itself was awakening, responding to their presence and the return of what had been lost. "The river remembers," Tansa whispered. "It carries the memories of those who came before. And now you do as well." Mara felt tears prick at her eyes, not from fear, but from awe. She had survived storms, ambush, and the unrelenting desert to reach this moment. And in the presence of this sacred land and these guardians, she finally understood the depth of what she had been part of. Suddenly, a voice called from the cliffs above. Mara turned to see a bandit, the last of those who had pursued them, holding a rifle and glaring with desperation. He must have tracked them despite everything. Mara's pulse jumped, but before the man could take aim, Tansa moved. In a blur of movement, the leader's foot caught on a root, and he tumbled down the slope, unharmed but incapacitated. The desert had protected them again, as if the land itself did not want this intruder to interfere. Ronan exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders. "That's the last of them," he said quietly. Mara nodded, heart still pounding. Tansa turned her gaze to Mara. "Now you must do something else. You must place the box in its proper resting place." She gestured to a natural alcove carved into the rock face, nearly invisible from a distance. It was lined with moss, and shallow depressions suggested it had held objects for centuries. Mara approached, her hands trembling slightly, and gently placed the box inside. As she did, the pigments in the vial shimmered, casting soft colors on the alcove walls. The papers unfolded as if moved by an invisible hand, revealing symbols that seemed to dance and tell a story. Mara felt a deep sense of connection, as if the voices of the past were speaking directly to her. Tansa's voice was quiet but firm. "You have done more than return the past. You have honored it. The river, the desert, and this valley recognize your heart. You are a friend to our people now." Mara exhaled, the enormity of the journey settling over her. She felt a lightness she hadn't felt in days, the fear, the fatigue, the uncertainty, all replaced by clarity and purpose. Ronan stepped close, brushing dust from her sleeve. "You did it, Mara. Together we did it." She smiled faintly, the bond between them now unspoken but undeniable. The trials had tested them, but they had emerged stronger. Mara realized that her life had changed forever. She was no longer just a traveler or survivor. She was part of something larger, something timeless. Tansa gestured to the river. "The water carries life, knowledge, and memory. You have returned what was lost. The valley will protect it now, and it will protect you should you ever return." Mara knelt by the river, dipping her hand into the cool, clear water. It flowed past her fingers like liquid silver, carrying the echoes of the past and the promise of the future. She felt a profound sense of peace. The desert, the river, the canyon, all of it had tested her. But she had emerged not just alive, but transformed. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet. Mara, Ronan, and Tansa stood together, silhouetted against the valley. The wind whispered through the grasses, carrying with it a quiet promise. The story of the past was safe. The present was theirs to live. and the future held possibilities they could not yet imagine. Mara turned to Ronan, her eyes reflecting the glow of the last sunlight. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Ronan smiled faintly, his dark eyes gentle and knowing. "Now we live. We protect. And we remember. The river brought us here for a reason, Mara, and now we honor it." Tansa nodded, her expression solemn but approving. "Your path will not always be easy, but you have shown courage, wisdom, and heart. That is what matters. Remember that." Mara inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of responsibility and the thrill of accomplishment all at once. She had been tested beyond anything she had imagined, and she had survived. More than survived, she had grown, learned, and earned a place in a story much larger than herself. As night fell, the hidden valley glowed softly under the starlight. Mara and Ronan made camp near the river, the box safely hidden in its alcove. The fire crackled gently, a comforting rhythm against the vast silence of the desert. For the first time since the flood, Mara felt truly safe. She looked at Tansa, who stood near the water, eyes reflecting the starlight. "Thank you," Mara said quietly. "For everything." Tansa inclined her head. "You did what needed to be done. Respect the land, respect its people, and the land will guide you. You are part of its story now." Ronan reached for Mara's hand, squeezing it gently. "And we face whatever comes next, together," he said. Mara nodded, feeling the warmth of connection and the certainty that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with courage, heart, and the knowledge that she was never truly alone. The river flowed endlessly, carrying with it secrets, memories, and life itself. And in the hidden valley, Mara, Ronan, and Tansa stood together, guardians of history, witnesses to the past, and torchbearers of the future. The desert night wrapped them in quiet, the stars above promising new journeys and the enduring strength of those who dared to walk its unforgiving lands. Mara closed her eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over her, knowing that she had not only survived the West, but had become a part of its enduring story.